Where are you at?
I'm 8 months pregnant.
How'd this happen?
I was following my baby's daddy, Ray Carruth, the football player.
Where's he
He was
at?
in the car in front of me, and he slowed down and put my foot up beside me and did this.
And then where'd he go?
He threw a lap. I think he did it. I don't know what to think.
In the late 1990s, Ray Carruth was living a life that many young athletes only dream of. A standout wide receiver at the University of Colorado. He was drafted in the first round by the Carolina Panthers in 1997 and was poised to become one of the NFL's next great stars. He had speed, talent, and the confidence of someone destined for greatness. But just 2 years into his professional career, Carruth's name would become synonymous not with football, but with one of the most shocking crimes in sports history. What began as a promising story of athletic success and financial opportunity quickly spiraled into a tale of jealousy, fear, and violence. On a November night in 1999, Carruth orchestrated a crime that left his pregnant girlfriend, Carruth Adams, fatally wounded and fighting for her life. Her heroic struggle to survive long enough to bring her son into the world and the survival of that child. Chancellor Lee Adams, born with cerebral palsy as a result of the shooting, turned the case into more than a headline. It became a symbol of tragedy, resilience, and the long-lasting consequences of choices made in anger and desperation. The story of Ray Carruth is not just the fall of a football player. It is the story of lives shattered, of justice pursued, and of a young boy who grew up carrying both the burden and the hope of his mother's final sacrifice. This is that story. For more videos like this, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Ray Lamar Wiggins later, known to the world as Ray Carruth, was born on January 20th, 1974, in Sacramento, California. His story began not in a stadium or under the lights of professional football, but in the modest neighborhoods of Northern California, where his mother, Theodore Carruth, raised him with discipline and determination. His father, Charles Wiggins, was absent for much of his childhood. That absence weighed heavily on Ray, but it also created a powerful bond with his mother, who became his greatest influence and fiercest supporter. Theodore was a strong woman who worked hard to provide her son with stability. She saw potential in Ray long before he did himself. From an early age, she noticed his athletic ability. He had quick feet, an instinctive ability to anticipate movement, and a competitive drive that separated him from other children. But it wasn't just physical ability. Ray was also bright and ambitious, and Theodore reminded him often that if he applied himself, he could carve out a future beyond the streets of Sacramento. Sports became Ray's outlet and anchor. He dabbled in basketball and track, but it was football that quickly emerged as his passion. On the playgrounds and practice fields, he showed an unusual mix of speed and finesse. By the time he entered Valley High School, it was clear he had the makings of a gifted wide receiver. Coaches saw in him a player who could stretch the field, find open seams, and make plays that turned games around. Despite his talent, Ray was not without struggles. Like many teenagers, he wrestled with questions of identity and direction. He carried the weight of being raised in a single-parent household, the responsibility of living up to his mother's sacrifices, and the allure of distractions that came with adolescence. Yet, with Theodore's steady guidance, Ray managed to keep himself focused on academics and athletics, understanding that football might one day provide an opportunity for college and, perhaps more. At Valley High, Ray Carruth grew into one of the school's top athletes. By his junior and senior years, his speed on the field was undeniable. Scouts began to take notice of his ability to stretch defenses and make difficult catches look routine. Though not the biggest player on the field, he stood at about 6 feet tall and weighed around 200 pounds. His agility and crisp route running made him stand out. In addition to football, Ray was an outstanding student. He maintained grades that made him eligible for college recruitment and demonstrated leadership qualities that made him respected among peers. His teammates often remarked on his confidence. Some saw it as cockiness, but others recognized it as the natural swagger of a young man who believed in his abilities. Recruiters from several universities began circling, but it was the University of Colorado at Boulder that would ultimately secure Carruth's commitment. The Buffaloes had a strong football program in the early 1990s, competing regularly in the Big 8 Conference, which would later merge into the Big 12. The school offered Ray both a scholarship and the chance to showcase his talents on a national stage. Ray arrived in Boulder in 1992, a young man eager to prove himself. College life presented new challenges, tougher academics, a higher level of athletic competition, and the freedom of being away from home for the first time. The University of Colorado football team was stacked with talent, and Ray had to work hard to earn playing time. In his early years with the Buffaloes, Ray developed a reputation for consistency and reliability. He wasn't flashy, but he made big plays when it mattered. By his junior and senior seasons, he had emerged as one of the team's most dependable wide receivers. His breakout came in 1996, when he recorded 1,043 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. That performance earned him first-team All-American honors, putting him on the radar of NFL scouts. Off the field, Ray's life was more complicated. College brought new relationships, new pressures, and new temptations. He began dating and navigating personal relationships that would later foreshadow the difficulties he faced as an adult. Those close to him noticed that while Ray was charming and intelligent, he sometimes struggled with responsibility in long-term commitments. He enjoyed the attention that came with being a star athlete, but he was not always prepared for the consequences of his choices. Around this time, Ray made a decision that would shape his public identity. He chose to change his last name from Wiggins to Carruth, adopting his mother's maiden name. The change was more than symbolic. It reflected the central role Theodore played in his life and his desire to distance himself from the father who had not been a steady presence. By adopting the Carruth name, Ray signaled his loyalty and gratitude to the woman who had raised him largely on her own. It was also a gesture of independence, a way to define himself on his own terms as he prepared to enter the NFL draft. When the 1997 NFL draft arrived, Ray Carruth was considered one of the top wide receiver prospects in the nation. His combination of speed, agility, and collegiate production made him an attractive pick for teams looking to strengthen their passing attack. On draft day, Carruth's dreams came true. With the 27th overall pick in the first round, the Carolina Panthers selected him. It was a moment of triumph, not only for Ray, but for Theodore, who had supported him through every step of the journey. For the first time, Ray Carruth was a millionaire. With a $3.7 million contract and a $1.3 million signing bonus, the young man from Sacramento had made it to the big leagues. He was poised to become a star. Yet even as Carruth stepped into the spotlight, cracks were beginning to show beneath the surface. In college, he had fathered a child with a girlfriend, Michelle Wright, and had struggled with the responsibilities of fatherhood. While he financially supported the child, Ray had little involvement in his son's upbringing. Wright later described him as inconsistent and unreliable, focused more on his career and personal freedom than on family commitments. This pattern of strained relationships, avoidance of responsibility, and difficulty managing personal pressures would continue into his professional career. Carruth's charm, athleticism, and intelligence made him successful on the field, but off the field, his decisions often revealed immaturity and self. Still, in 1997, few could have predicted the dramatic fall that was to come. Ray Carruth was young, wealthy, and admired, standing at the threshold of a career that might have made him one of the NFL's brightest stars. But within just 2 years, his choices would lead to a crime that shocked the nation and forever defined his name. When Ray Carruth walked across the stage in April 1997 as the 27th overall pick of the NFL draft, he carried with him the promise of greatness. The Carolina Panthers, a relatively new franchise that had entered the league in 1995, were eager to build around young talent. Carruth was brought in to be a weapon for quarterback Kerry Collins, someone who could stretch the field and provide a reliable target in the passing game. For Ray, it was a moment of vindication. The countless hours of practice, the sacrifices his mother made, and the struggles of adolescence seemed to fade in that instant. He had made it to the NFL, and the financial rewards were staggering. His rookie contract was worth $3.7 million, including a signing bonus of over $1 million, life-changing sum for someone who had grown up with far less. Carruth entered a locker room filled with veterans who had already established their place in the league. The Panthers were a young but promising team, fresh off an impressive run to the NFC Championship game in only their second season. Expectations were high, and Carruth was expected to contribute immediately. His transition to the professional level was smoother than many anticipated. With his speed and precise route running, Carruth quickly proved he could create separation from defenders. He wasn't the biggest receiver on the roster, but his agility and quickness made him dangerous. In his rookie season, he recorded 44 receptions for 545 yards and 4 touchdowns, solid numbers that hinted at even greater potential. Reporters covering the Panthers praised his confidence and work ethic. Carruth has all the tools, one analyst remarked during the 1997 season. He's got quick feet, reliable hands, and a competitive edge. He's only going to get better. Behind the scenes, however, teammates noticed something else, a streak of arrogance. Carruth carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed he had already arrived. He could be charming and charismatic, but also distant. Some teammates got along with him, while others found him aloof. Coaches, too, sometimes struggled with his attitude, though they couldn't deny his talent. Just as his career seemed poised to take off, Ray Carruth's momentum was derailed. In the second game of the 1998 season, he suffered a broken right foot, an injury that sidelined him for the remainder of the year. It was a devastating blow for a young receiver trying to establish himself. The injury not only stalled his career, but also tested his patience. Suddenly, Carruth found himself watching from the sidelines as his teammates battled through the season. Injuries are part of the NFL, but for Ray, whose confidence was rooted in athletic performance, the setback was difficult. Some observers noted that his maturity was tested during this time, and not always successfully. He grew frustrated, restless, and at times withdrawn. The Panthers, meanwhile, were struggling. After their surprise success in 1996, the team had slipped back into mediocrity, and morale was low. Carruth's absence only added to the challenges. In 1999, Carruth returned healthy and ready to prove himself again. Coaches and fans hoped he would build on the promise of his rookie season. He started the year strong, showing flashes of the playmaking ability that had made him a first-round pick. But even as his career seemed to be getting back on track, Ray's personal life was beginning to unravel in ways that would have devastating consequences. Like many professional athletes, Ray Carruth was suddenly living a lifestyle that few could imagine. The money, the fame, the adoration of fans, all of it was intoxicating. He bought nice cars, lived comfortably, and enjoyed the attention that came with being an NFL player. Women were drawn to him, and Ray seemed to enjoy the chase as much as the relationships themselves. But his off-the-field life was not without complications. In college, Carruth had already fathered a son with Michelle Wright. While he paid child support, his involvement in the boy's life was minimal. Wright later described Ray as unreliable and self-centered, more focused on himself than on his child. These patterns would continue in his relationships as a professional athlete. Carruth's charm made him popular, but his inability to commit created tension. He often avoided responsibility when things became serious, leaving behind a trail of strained relationships. It was within this context that he met Carruth Adams, a young real estate agent and former model from Charlotte, North Carolina. Carruth was outgoing, ambitious, and beautiful. Friends described her as kind-hearted and driven, someone who wanted more from life than glamour. She met Ray in 1998 at a Charlotte nightclub, and the two quickly became romantically involved. Their relationship, however, was complicated. While Carruth was drawn to Ray's charm and status, she also saw his flaws, his reluctance to settle down, his desire for control, and his immaturity. By 1999, Carruth discovered she was pregnant with Ray's child. Her decision to keep the baby created tension between them. Ray was not enthusiastic about becoming a father again, especially at a time when his career seemed to demand his full attention. The pregnancy became a source of conflict, with Ray pressuring Carruth at times to consider alternatives she refused to accept. As the 1999 season progressed, Carruth's life was becoming increasingly divided between his professional responsibilities and his personal turmoil. On the field, he remained a valuable player for the Panthers, but he was not producing at the level many had expected. Injuries, inconsistency, and distractions off the field limited his performance. Off the field, his relationship with Carruth was strained. Friends of Carruth later recalled that she wanted Ray to be involved in the baby's life, but she also understood his reluctance. She hoped that once the child was born, Ray would embrace fatherhood. Ray, on the other hand, seemed to view the pregnancy as a burden, something that threatened his financial security and personal freedom. What neither of them could have imagined was just how far that conflict would spiral and how it would ultimately destroy lives. By the end of 1999, Ray Carruth's life told two very different stories. Publicly, he was a professional athlete with millions of fans and a promising career. He was the image of success, a young man who had overcome hardship to reach the pinnacle of American sports. Privately, he was a man struggling with responsibility, control, and fear. His inability to handle personal challenges with maturity would soon intersect with his public life in the most tragic way possible. For Ray Carruth, the next chapter of his life would not be written on the football field, but in the courts, the headlines, and the tragic memories of those whose lives he would forever alter. As Carruth's pregnancy progressed, the tension between her and Ray escalated. Friends of Carruth later recalled that she remained hopeful Ray would eventually step into the role of father. She often defended him, believing he was struggling under the weight of his own fears, but would ultimately come around. Ray, however, saw things differently. He seemed increasingly desperate to find a way out of the situation. To him, the pregnancy represented entrapment, a permanent bond he had not chosen. Instead of embracing the reality, he looked for ways to control it. Court testimony and witness accounts later revealed that Ray had pressured Carruth on multiple occasions to have an abortion. She refused every time. For Carruth, there was never a question. She would have her baby. This refusal deepened Ray's resentment. Rather than accept her decision, he began to view Carruth as an obstacle to the life he wanted. Around this time, Ray developed connections with men who were far outside the world of professional sports. Among them was Van Brett Watkins Sr., a career criminal with a long record of violent offenses. Ray also associated with Michael Kennedy, a friend who would later be implicated in the unfolding events. Watkins, in particular, would become central to Ray's plan. Described as volatile and intimidating, Watkins had a reputation for violence. It was with men like him that Ray began discussing ways to solve his problem with Carruth. According to trial testimony, Ray offered Watkins money to carry out an act of violence against Carruth. The discussions revealed a chilling calculation. Ray wanted Carruth and the baby gone, believing it was the only way to free himself from the responsibilities he feared. The plan, as prosecutors later laid out, was simple in its cruelty. Ray would lure Carruth into a vulnerable situation, and Watkins, along with accomplices, would ambush her. By staging the attack to appear as a random act of violence, Ray hoped to distance himself from the crime while eliminating the problem he believed the pregnancy posed. On the evening of November 16, 1999, the plan was set into motion. Ray invited Carruth to join him at a movie in Charlotte. Carruth, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, agreed. She still harbored hope that Ray would come around and wanted to maintain a connection with him for the sake of their child. The two attended a screening of The Bone Collector. To Carruth, it must have felt like an ordinary night out. To Ray, it was the final step in a calculated scheme. After the movie, Ray and Carruth left the theater in separate vehicles, Ray in his car, Carruth following behind in hers. What Carruth didn't know was that Ray's vehicle was deliberately slowing down, guiding her into a trap. Behind them, a car carrying Van Brett Watkins and Michael Kennedy pulled into position. As the vehicles traveled down Ree Road in Charlotte, Ray suddenly stopped his car, forcing Carruth to slow behind him. In that moment, Watkins pulled alongside her. Gunshots rang out. Watkins fired multiple times into Carruth's car, striking her 4 times. Severely wounded, she managed to keep driving, veering off the road before stopping. Ray, instead of helping, fled the scene. Despite her injuries, Carruth demonstrated extraordinary courage. She managed to call 911 from her car phone, gasping for breath as she explained what had happened. In that call, she identified Ray Carruth as the man who had orchestrated the shooting. She told the dispatcher she had been following Ray after leaving the movies and that another car had pulled up and opened fire. Cherika's words would later prove to be the most damning evidence against Ray, even as her life slipped away. She was determined to tell the truth and protect her unborn child. Carruth was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed an emergency C-section to deliver her baby boy. Chancellor Lee Adams. Chancellor survived but suffered traumatic brain injuries due to the lack of oxygen during the shooting. He was later diagnosed with cerebral palsy, a lifelong condition that would require constant care. Carruth clung to life for nearly a month, undergoing multiple surgeries. She remained conscious at times and gave further statements to investigators, consistently naming Ray Carruth as the orchestrator of the attack. On December 14, 1999, Carruth Adams succumbed to her injuries. Her death transformed the case from an attempted murder into a homicide. The shooting of Carruth Adams stunned Charlotte and the entire nation. The story of a professional football player allegedly arranging the murder of his pregnant girlfriend was as shocking as it was tragic. For the Panthers, the incident was devastating. Ray Carruth was immediately suspended by the team, his once promising career in shambles. For the NFL, the case became a painful reminder of the league's vulnerability to off-the-field scandals. For Cherika's family, the focus was not on football, but on survival specifically. The survival of baby Chancellor, who became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. And for Ray Carruth, the net was beginning to close. In the days following the November 16, 1999 shooting, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police scrambled to piece together what had happened on Ree Road. They had one crucial lead: the 911 call from Carruth Adams, and it pointed squarely at Ray Carruth. Detectives reviewed her statements repeatedly. She had been calm enough, even as her breathing faltered, to describe how Carruth had slowed his vehicle in front of her moments before another car pulled up and opened fire. It was enough to raise immediate suspicion, but investigators still needed proof. Carruth's public persona complicated matters. He was not only a first-round NFL draft pick, but also a local celebrity. The Carolina Panthers were in their third season, and Carruth had been one of their promising young stars. The possibility that a professional football player had orchestrated an ambush on his pregnant girlfriend seemed unthinkable, yet the evidence was mounting. The morning after the shooting, police visited Carruth's home in the upscale Quail Hollow neighborhood. They found him polite and composed. He confirmed that he and Carruth had been on a date, but insisted they left the theater in separate cars and that he'd gone home afterward. Unaware anything had happened until he heard from friends later that night. Two officers, his demeanor felt rehearsed. They noted how calm he appeared, not shocked, not grief-stricken, simply detached. When asked if he would provide a statement at headquarters, he agreed without hesitation. In his written account, Carruth described the movie, The Drive, and said he noticed nothing suspicious before they parted ways. It was a version that conflicted sharply with Cherika's recorded words. Meanwhile, detectives traced the ballistic evidence, 5 rounds from a .357 Magnum, and began searching for suspects who might have had access to that weapon. Leads soon pointed to Michael Kennedy, a local nightclub owner known to associate with players and entertainers around Charlotte. Kennedy's name came up again when phone records revealed multiple calls between him and Carruth on the night of the shooting. That discovery was the first major breakthrough. Police began to suspect that Carruth had not acted alone. Within days, Kennedy was arrested on unrelated drug charges, giving investigators a chance to question him. Under pressure, Kennedy admitted he had been in the car from which the shots were fired, but claimed Carruth had orchestrated everything. He described Carruth's vehicle slowing down to trap Cherika's car, and Watkins, the passenger, pulling the trigger. The story matched the 911 call almost exactly. On November 24, 1999, 8 days after the shooting, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police arrested Ray Carruth and charged him with conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument with intent to destroy an unborn child. Carruth posted a $3 million bond and was released under strict conditions. He was required to turn himself in immediately if Carruth had died. Too many. The arrest of a professional football player on such grave charges was surreal. The Panthers suspended him indefinitely, removing his nameplate from his locker. The NFL issued a statement expressing shock and sympathy for Carruth and her family. Publicly, Carruth maintained his innocence. Privately, detectives feared he might run. For nearly a month, Carruth remained alive in the hospital, undergoing surgeries and communicating intermittently through written notes. On December 14, 1999, her body could no longer endure the trauma. She died surrounded by her mother and medical staff. Within hours, prosecutors elevated the charges against Carruth to first-degree murder. Under the terms of his bond, he was required to surrender himself to authorities immediately. He didn't. When officers arrived at his home that night, Ray Carruth was gone. His phone was off. His car was missing. The man who had once been the face of an NFL franchise was now a fugitive. The disappearance set off a nationwide manhunt. Police released his description to the media, and the FBI joined the search. His mother in California made public pleas for him to turn himself in. The story dominated national headlines. An NFL player on the run after allegedly orchestrating the murder of his pregnant girlfriend. Days passed with no sign of him. On December 15, 1999, the day after Carruth's death, authorities received a tip. A hotel manager in Parker's Crossroads, Tennessee, a small town off Interstate 40, about 400 miles west of Charlotte, had noticed a suspicious car parked behind the motel. It matched the description of Carruth's silver Toyota Camry, registered under his name. Police approached carefully. Inside the trunk, they found Ray Carruth curled in a fetal position, wearing only socks and a light jacket. In the trunk with him were bottles of urine, food wrappers, cash, and a cell phone, signs he had been hiding there for some time. He was arrested without resistance and transported back to North Carolina. Back in Charlotte, Carruth faced charges of first-degree murder of Carruth Adams, attempted murder of an unborn child, conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle. Michael Kennedy, Fun Brett Watkins, SR, and Stanley Abraham were also charged in connection with the crime. Watkins, the triggerman, faced the same potential death penalty as Carruth. Carruth's bond was revoked permanently. He was placed in the Mecklenburg County Jail to await trial. The arrest and capture of Ray Carruth stunned the sports world. The Carolina Panthers quickly terminated his contract. Fans who had once cheered for him now expressed outrage and sorrow. Media outlets across the country covered every development. Commentators debated how an athlete with fame, money, and opportunity could be involved in such an act. For the first time, the public heard the details of the 911 call, Carruth's voice naming Carruth as the orchestrator. At the center of it all was a newborn child, Chancellor Lee Adams, fighting to survive in neonatal care. While Carruth's legal troubles unfolded, Sandra Adams, Carruth's mother, focused entirely on her grandson. Chancellor's brain had been deprived of oxygen for critical minutes during his mother's shooting, resulting in permanent cerebral palsy. Doctors warned he might never walk or speak, but Sandra saw him as a living piece of Carruth's legacy. Her resilience and forgiveness would later become one of the most inspiring elements of the story, a contrast to the anger and betrayal that surrounded Carruth's fall. Over the next year, prosecutors built their case. Phone records, witness testimony, and Carruth's final written notes all painted a damning picture. The key question for the jury would be intent. Had Carruth actively planned the murder, or was he merely present when it occurred? The defense claimed the shooting was a spontaneous act by Kennedy and Watkins, carried out without Carruth's knowledge. The prosecution argued it was a premeditated plot to avoid paying child support. The stage was set for one of the most closely watched trials in North Carolina history. By the time the calendar turned to 2000, Ray Carruth's life was unrecognizable. The million-dollar contracts, the luxury cars, and the promise of stardom had been replaced by the confines of a jail cell and the certainty of public condemnation. The night of November 16th had shattered more than one life. It had destroyed his own future, ended Carruth's, and forever changed the trajectory of their sons. Carruth's story had gone from triumph to tragedy, and the full measure of justice was still to come. The trial of Ray Carruth began in late October 2000 in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in Charlotte, North Carolina. It had been nearly a year since the shooting of Carruth Adams, and the case had drawn national attention. Reporters from every major network filled the courthouse. Sketch artists crowded the benches, and television crews lined the streets outside. The courtroom atmosphere was thick with tension. On one side sat the prosecution, led by District Attorney Gentry, Cottle, determined to prove that Carruth had orchestrated the cold-blooded murder of the woman carrying his child. On the other sat Carruth and his defense team, who insisted that he was guilty of poor judgment and cowardice, but not murder. It was a case that would test not only the evidence, but also the limits of how far circumstantial proof could go to establish intent. The prosecution opened with the most powerful piece of evidence they had, the 911 call. As the recording played, the courtroom fell silent. Cherika's faint, pain-filled voice filled the air. He was in front of me, and then they came up beside me. ... Ray Carruth did this. It was not a dramatic outburst. It was calm, factual, and final. The jury listened closely, many visibly shaken. Her voice alone painted the picture of betrayal. Next came the phone records, dozens of calls between Carruth and his co-conspirators. On the night of the shooting, investigators had tracked the timing. Calls placed before the movie, after the movie, and during the drive down Ree Road. The timeline aligned perfectly with the attack. Prosecutors argued that Carruth had coordinated the ambush by phone, ensuring Kennedy and Watkins knew when to strike. But the most explosive testimony came from Van Brett Watkins Sr., the triggerman himself. Watkins was a career criminal, intimidating, volatile, and brutally direct. He had agreed to testify in exchange for the prosecution not seeking the death penalty against him. When he took the stand, his presence was commanding. Tattoos covered his arms. His voice was rough, and he looked directly at Carruth as he spoke. Ray wanted the girl gone, Watkins said. He didn't want the baby. He said she was going to mess up his life. He described in chilling detail how Carruth had promised him $6,000 to carry out the shooting. Watkins claimed Carruth set up the ambush by slowing his vehicle to box Carruth in, then speeding off immediately after Watkins fired the shots. The courtroom hung on every word. The prosecution's case had found its voice, and it came from the man who pulled the trigger. When cross-examined, the defense tried to discredit Watkins, pointing out his long criminal record, history of violence, and plea deal. Watkins did not deny his past. "Yeah, I'm a killer," he said bluntly, "but I ain't no liar." His statement hit the room like a hammer. Michael Kennedy's testimony supported much of Watkins' account, though he portrayed himself as more of a reluctant participant. He described how Carruth had repeatedly discussed getting rid of Carruth and the unborn baby, and how the group followed the two cars that night. Phone company experts testified to the timing of the calls. Investigators displayed a map tracing the route, the theater, the Ree Road turn, the position of each vehicle. Doctors and paramedics detailed Cherika's wounds and the emergency birth of Chancellor Lee. They described her survival for nearly a month, a testament to her strength and determination to protect her son. Sandra Adams also took the stand. Her quiet dignity stood in stark contrast to the violence described throughout the trial. She shared Cherika's final words and her daughter's notes that again identified Carruth as responsible. Carruth's defense team, led by attorney David Rudolph, faced a formidable task. They did not deny that the shooting had occurred, nor that Carruth had been present. Their strategy was to create reasonable doubt about intent, to argue that Carruth did not plan or direct the murder. Rudolph argued that Carruth had been scared of Watkins and Kennedy, suggesting that these men acted on their own, without Ray's direction. He painted Carruth as a man who made poor decisions, but was not a killer. When Carruth took the stand in his own defense, he appeared nervous but composed. He told the jury that he never wanted Carruth dead, only that he had asked Kennedy to talk to her about the pregnancy. He claimed Watkins acted on his own after things got out of hand. The prosecution, however, dismantled this narrative. They asked Carruth why he fled the state if he was innocent, why his phone records aligned perfectly with the timing of the ambush, and why Carruth would have named him on her deathbed if he were not involved. Carruth's answers that he panicked, that he feared being falsely blamed, sounded hollow. The closing argument summed up the emotional weight of the case. District Attorney Cottle stood before the jury and held up a photo of Carruth and Chancellor. "This woman fought to live, to bring her son into the world," he said. "She told us who did this. She told us with her last breaths." Ray Carruth used his position, his money, and his influence to arrange her death because he didn't want the inconvenience of being a father. The defense countered by urging the jury to separate emotion from fact. "Ray Carruth is guilty of cowardice," Rudolph said. "He's guilty of running, but he is not guilty of pulling the trigger or ordering anyone to pull it. Do not let hatred replace justice." After deliberating for 4 days, the jury returned its verdict on January 19, 2001. The courtroom fell into complete silence as the foreman stood. Ray Carruth was found not guilty of first-degree murder, which would have carried a possible death sentence, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of using an instrument to destroy an unborn child, guilty of discharging a firearm into occupied property. He was sentenced to 18 to 24 years in prison. For many, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but not completely. The jury had spared him the death penalty, believing that Watkins acted as the principal shooter. Yet few doubted that without Carruth's orchestration, Carruth Adams would still be alive. Watkins received a sentence of at least 40 years in prison. Kennedy, who cooperated with prosecutors, received a reduced sentence of 11 years. Abraham was sentenced to less than 90 days after pleading to lesser charges. Carruth was taken to the North Carolina Department of Corrections, beginning his sentence at the Polk Correctional Institution. Outside the courthouse, Sandra Adams spoke to reporters. Her strength moved everyone listening. "I forgive Ray," she said softly. "I have to, for my own peace. But forgiveness does not erase responsibility." Her words, filled with grace, became a lasting symbol of faith and resilience. The fall of Ray Carruth was total. Just 3 years earlier, he had been catching touchdown passes and earning more than $1 million a season. Now, he was an inmate with a number instead of a name. The NFL distanced itself entirely. The Panthers removed every trace of him from their archives. His career statistics, minus 62 receptions, 804 yards, 4 touchdowns, became a grim footnote in the league's history. For fans who had once cheered him, the story became a warning about wasted potential and the destructive power of pride and fear. Though the trial ended in 2001, its impact endured for decades. Carruth Adams was remembered not as a victim, but as a mother whose final actions saved her son. Her 911 call, her written notes, and her strength inspired laws and awareness campaigns supporting pregnant victims of violence. Chancellor Lee Adams grew up in the care of his grandmother, surrounded by love and compassion. By the 2010s, after nearly a decade behind bars, Ray Carruth began to open up. Slowly, he wrote letters to friends, to journalists, and eventually to Sandra Adams. In these letters, he began expressing remorse, though the sincerity of his words was debated. In 2017, 1 year before his release, Carruth wrote a long, handwritten letter to Charlotte's WBTV News, publicly apologizing to Sandra and Chancellor. "I'm sorry for the loss of your daughter," he wrote. "I'm sorry for the role I played in it. I feel responsible for everything that happened, and I want to be part of Chancellor's life, if you would allow it." The letter drew national attention. Many saw it as too little, too late, a man facing release trying to reshape his image. Sandra Adams responded with grace, but also firmness. She told reporters that while she had forgiven Carruth, she had no intention of allowing him custody or control over Chancellor. "Forgiveness doesn't mean access," she said. "It means peace." Still, Sandra acknowledged that the letter showed growth. "I believe he means some of it," she said. "Maybe prison gave him time to think. Maybe God is working on him." In the years after his release, Carruth lived quietly, avoiding interviews. He had spoken occasionally through letters, saying he wants to live a peaceful, private life. He expressed a desire to work with at-risk youth someday, though Sandra Adams has said she prefers that he focus on his own redemption first. The story of Ray Carruth remains one of tragedy and transformation, of wasted potential and extraordinary grace. 18 years in prison did not undo the pain of November 1999, but it changed the man who caused it. Whether that change was true repentance or the mellowing of time remains for history to judge. For Sandra and Chancellor Adams, life continues. They remain living testaments to survival and faith. Sandra once said in an interview, "Every morning I see Chancellor smile. I see God's mercy. That's what wins in the end, not hate, not revenge, but mercy." What true crime case has stuck with you or kept you up at night? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestion might be featured in an upcoming episode.